As the stakes get higher, she's faced with a decision that could change everything, forever. They mocked her, belittled her for not being enough, for not fitting into their world. Her ex-husband, his rich friends, they thought they knew her, but they had no idea. The moment she walked into that room, everything changed. It wasn't the way she looked, or even the way she acted. It was the name that silenced the room, her name, spoken by a billionaire who saw her for who she truly was. And this was the moment everything turned around. But would she let them see her as more than just the woman they discarded? Ava Johnson stepped into the gleaming restaurant, her heart pounding in her chest. The place exuded a wealth that was almost tangible, like the walls themselves were polished with dollars. She ran her fingers down the smooth navy fabric of her blazer, adjusting it as she walked past the host. The jacket, simple and professional, felt like the armor she needed tonight. Yet it wasn't meant to impress anyone, just to blend in. She hadn't expected to be here at all, but Nolan had called in a favor. He needed someone to represent his silent partner at this dinner. Someone trustworthy. Someone who wouldn't let him down. And Ava, for all her struggles, always did her best to keep promises. But as she entered the grand dining room, she felt a sharp pang of uncertainty. There were the polished glass chandeliers, the sound of crystal glasses clinking together, and the low hum of expensive conversations. It wasn't her world, and for a moment, she felt small. The familiar sting of self-doubt settled in her chest. She was a mother, a woman who'd been judged far too often, whose ex-husband, James, had never given her the respect she deserved. The whispers of her past failures clung to her like the smell of cheap perfume. Ava's eyes scanned the room, looking for Nolan's assistant. Her stomach twisted, and she quickly looked away from the figures in sharp suits and high heels, pretending that she belonged among them. But she felt like an outsider, as if she was playing a role she didn't understand. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A quick glance. Running 20 minutes late. Grab a seat near the west wall. You'll know the table. She nodded to herself, slipping the phone back into her purse. Ava made her way through the sea of well-dressed strangers, but trying to ignore the voices that were just loud enough to hear over the music. As she approached the table Nolan had described, her breath caught in her throat. Ava? The voice sent a shock through her body, and her steps faltered. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected him to be here. Standing near the bar, in a group of laughing men, was Bradley Knox, her ex-husband. His tall frame, neatly dressed in a sharp tuxedo, was instantly recognizable, as though time hadn't passed at all. Yet he was still the man who'd walked out on her without looking back. His eyes found hers immediately. There was no mistaking it. His laughter died when their gazes locked. A cold silence passed between them, and the room seemed to freeze for a moment. Bradley's eyes narrowed, his lips curling into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He moved effortlessly across the room, weaving through the guests. Ava stood still, frozen by the weight of the years that had passed between them, or the weight of the words unsaid. "Bianca?" he asked, his voice cutting through the air with just the right amount of condescension. Ava took a breath, steadying herself. She wasn't about to show him the cracks in her armor. "Business dinner," she replied flatly. Bradley gave her a quick once-over, his eyes scanning her from head to toe. Ava could feel the judgment radiating off him, but she wasn't going to let him see how deeply it stung. He raised an eyebrow, and a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. "Business, right?" Ava didn't flinch. "I'm representing a silent partner," she said, her voice steady. The words felt like a shield, though she knew they wouldn't protect her from his scrutiny. Bradley didn't answer right away. He just stared at her, his gaze lingering a little longer than necessary. "Still keeping things modest, I see." The sting of his words hit harder than she'd expected. Yeah, but Ava didn't allow herself to feel anything beyond the sharp edge of her defiance. "Enjoy your evening, Bradley," she said coolly, turning to walk away before he could say anything more. She didn't stop. She couldn't stop. She walked swiftly to the table, hearing Bradley's voice behind her, but she refused to look back. She didn't have time for this. The table she was heading toward, Nolan's table, was calling her, and the dinner ahead was more important than the ghosts from her past. But even as she sat down and tried to focus on the task at hand, she could feel his eyes on her. The feeling was undeniable. Bradley was watching, waiting for her to fail, waiting for her to crack. And as she looked around the table at the powerful faces, the high-end suits, and the murmurs of rich investors discussing numbers, she couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong here. Not yet. Not yet. Ava sat at the table, her hands clenched tightly around her water glass, while trying to ignore the hum of conversations around her. The air felt heavy, oppressive even, as though every eye in the room was trained on her. She kept her focus on the menu, the words blurred by the tightness in her chest. She had made it this far, hadn't she? So she was here, representing a silent partner. But the truth was, Ava had never felt so out of place in her life. Nolan's assistant had finally arrived, flustered and apologetic, clearly behind schedule. The assistant, Catherine, rushed to sit across from Ava, her eyes wide with embarrassment. "Sorry, Ms. Johnson, there's been a mix-up with the seating chart," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're actually at the main table. The primary investors..." Before Ava could react, Catherine gestured to the long table across the room, the one right in the center of everything. Ava's heart sank. The main table? She was just a woman who had grown up in a small town, built her life from nothing, and now she was going to sit at a table surrounded by billionaires, CEOs, and power brokers. The thought almost made her choke. "The primary investors?" Ava echoed, her voice barely audible, even to herself. But Catherine had already stood up, signaling for Ava to follow. The walk across the room felt like an eternity. Every step she took, the room seemed to close in around her. She could feel the weight of their stares, the judgment behind their polite smiles as they sized her up. While the once welcoming air of the restaurant now felt cold, distant, as though it had forgotten who she was. But it wasn't just the investors at the table she had to face. It was Bradley. As she walked past, she caught a glimpse of him out of the corner of her eye, standing by his group of friends, laughing. When their eyes met, a silence passed between them. She didn't flinch. She couldn't afford to. She was determined to keep her composure, and to show them all that she was more than the woman they thought she was, more than what Bradley had reduced her to years ago. And then came the words that felt like a knife. "We were married once," Bradley said to his companions, loud enough for Ava to hear. Ava's stomach twisted. There was nothing worse than hearing your own life reduced to a punchline. But she didn't let him see how much it hurt. She couldn't afford to. Her focus was on the table ahead, the one Catherine had just led her to. "Ladies and gentlemen," the older man at the table said as Ava arrived, "we're just waiting on Mr. Lawson. He should be here within the hour." The man's sharp eyes skimmed her briefly, a look of mild curiosity crossing his features before his attention shifted elsewhere. Ava wasn't sure if she was supposed to sit at the head of the table or somewhere near the end, but Catherine gently guided her to an empty seat in the center. As Ava slid into the chair, she glanced around the room. This was it. She was in the heart of their world, surrounded by people whose names she had only ever heard in the pages of magazines or financial reports. Their gazes were like knives, each glance a reminder of the world she didn't belong to. The minutes dragged on. Ava could hear snippets of conversation around her, Talk of market trends, mergers, projections, and the projected returns of high-risk investments. She stayed quiet, and her mind racing with the weight of the moment. What was she doing here? Why had she agreed to come? Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She glanced at it quickly. A message from Nolan. "Don't worry, you've got this." She typed a quick reply, trying to steady her hands. "I'm trying." Then the door opened, and the whole room seemed to shift. The man who walked in wasn't like the others. He wasn't wearing the same tailored suit, nor was he concerned with fitting into the world of Wall Street numbers and luxury. Gabriel Lawson. The name was known to everyone in the room. Ava had heard of him in passing, of course. Everybody had. Gabriel Lawson, billionaire tech mogul, founder of Lawson Enterprises, known for his sharp mind and business acumen. Ava wasn't sure what to expect when he walked in, but when he did, it felt like the entire room shifted around him. He wasn't like the others. There was a calmness to him, and a stillness, as though he didn't need to prove anything to anyone. And as he made his way toward the table, his eyes met Ava's across the room. There was something there, something like recognition, something that pulled at her chest. "Ava," he said, as he reached the table, his voice low, almost like a murmur in the noise of the room. Ava's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected him to acknowledge her. But there it was, the weight of his gaze, the sudden warmth in his voice, a stark contrast to the coldness of the room. He didn't shake hands with anyone else, didn't waste time with pleasantries. Gabriel simply pulled out the chair beside her, sat down with ease, and offered a small, warm smile that seemed to settle everything around him. "Sorry I'm late, everyone," Gabriel said. His tone relaxed as though this was a room full of old friends instead of strangers. Then, without missing a beat, he turned to Ava. You started without me." Ava swallowed. "I wasn't sure when you'd arrive." She tried to sound casual, to play it off as if this was just another business dinner. But the truth was, her chest was tight, her pulse quickening. She hadn't expected him to be this different, this kind. But before she could say more, Gabriel reached over and placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. The touch was soft, comforting even, as though he had known her for years. "You said you'd be late," he said, and his eyes catching hers again, those sharp, intense eyes that somehow didn't feel like they were measuring her. Instead, they felt like they were seeing her. Really seeing her. The room fell quiet, the clinking of silverware and glasses fading into the background. Ava was keenly aware of Bradley sitting across from her, his eyes now narrowed. "I said I'd try not to be." The shift was immediate. Bradley's face drained of color. Everyone at the table looked at Ava, then at Gabriel. But none of them asked the obvious question. Who was this woman sitting at the table with Gabriel Lawson? What did she mean to him? Ava's heart raced. She wasn't sure if it was the tension, the unexpected attention, or something else that was pulling her attention away from the conversation at hand. But for the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. Ava's pulse quickened. She could feel the weight of Bradley's gaze from across the table, but like 1,000 invisible needles piercing her skin. He had that look on his face again, the one that always made her feel smaller, like she wasn't good enough. But this time there was something else behind his eyes, something sharper. He was waiting for her to crack, to show weakness, to remind everyone why he had left her. She took a slow breath, the air thick with the tension of unspoken words. The room seemed to shrink around her, all the voices of the investors fading into a dull murmur. All she could focus on was Bradley. The way he was looking at her, his lips twisted into a smile that felt more like a sneer. He didn't even need to speak. His expression said everything. Ava couldn't remember the last time she had felt this exposed. This was supposed to be her moment to shine. But all the memories, all the mistakes, came flooding back. The way he had left her, the way he had belittled her, the way he had said she wasn't enough for the life he wanted. And now here he was, still acting as though he had every right to judge her, as though his words still held power over her. "Bianca, I didn't know you were into this world," Bradley said, his voice deliberately loud enough for the table to hear. "This business stuff. You always said you weren't cut out for it." The words hit like a punch to the gut. Ava didn't flinch, but the sting was there deep down, and she had fought so hard to build a life on her own, to show everyone, including him, that she was capable. And yet, there he was, as though she hadn't changed at all, as though she would always be the same woman who had married him and failed. Her mind raced. She could feel the anger bubbling up inside her, a fury she hadn't let herself feel in years, but she wasn't going to let him see it. Not now, not here, not in front of these people. "Funny," she said, her voice steady, too steady. I never thought I'd see the day when you, of all people, would lecture me on business." The table went silent. Everyone was listening now, eyes darting between them. Ava could feel the weight of their attention, their curiosity. She wasn't sure if they were watching her in pity or admiration, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that she wasn't going to let Bradley walk all over her anymore. Not in front of these people. Not anywhere. Bradley's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but it quickly returned, though it didn't reach his eyes. "You always did like to think you were smarter than you were," he said, his voice laced with disdain. The words stung more than she would admit, but Ava refused to let him see her vulnerability. She wasn't the same woman who had cowered under his judgment, the one who had let him walk away with nothing more than a quick apology. She had changed, and she was going to prove it now. Ava leaned forward, meeting Bradley's gaze head-on, and her voice cutting through the silence. "You left me," she said, her words sharp. "You walked away when things got tough. You didn't believe in me then, and you sure as hell don't believe in me now. But I don't need your approval, Bradley. Not anymore." The words hung in the air between them. The room felt still, the only sound coming from the clink of silverware on plates, the murmurs of the other guests too far away to reach her. Bradley's face turned a shade paler, yet his eyes narrowing as he struggled to find a response. For a moment, Ava felt a surge of power. She hadn't backed down. She hadn't let him see her shake, hadn't let him break her. She was stronger than he had ever given her credit for, and for the first time in a long time, she felt in control. But just as quickly, the power shifted. Ava's mind returned to the business meeting, to the reason she was here in the first place. She wasn't here to fight with Bradley. No, she was here to make a name for herself, to prove she belonged in this world, even if he and everyone else doubted her. Ava took another breath, letting the anger fade into a calm resolve. She wasn't going to let Bradley ruin this. Not again. "I'm sorry you feel that way," she said quietly, looking away from him and back at the table. "But this dinner isn't about us. It's about business. So unless you're planning to offer something other than your opinion, and I suggest we focus on why we're really here." The room was silent for a long moment, and then the older man at the head of the table cleared his throat, breaking the tension. "Let's not dwell on personal matters," he said, his voice polite but firm. "We're here to discuss the future." Ava nodded, her gaze flickering back to Bradley one last time. She saw the frustration in his eyes, the way his jaw clenched in that familiar way. But it didn't matter. She had won. Well, he wasn't going to control her anymore. The conversation slowly shifted back to the business at hand, but Ava's mind was elsewhere. The weight of the moment hung in the air, but she didn't feel the need to rush. She had made her point. She had held her ground. And that was enough. As the discussion continued, Ava focused on the men around the table, listening to their ideas and opinions, weighing the information carefully. She wasn't here to fight battles she didn't need to, yet she was here to prove herself, and she would. But deep down she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end, that somewhere in this room someone was watching her, really watching her, and that someone might just change her life in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The conversation at the table began to shift back to business, but Ava could still feel the weight of Bradley's words hanging in the air, his dismissive attitude lingering like a bad taste. She tried to push it aside, focusing on the men around the table, each of them deep in their own discussions about projections, returns, and market strategies. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong here. She sat back in her chair, her hands folded in front of her, listening but not really hearing the chatter around her. The voices of the investors were muffled by the sound of her own thoughts. Her mind kept circling back to Bradley, his smug smile, and the way he had belittled her in front of everyone. But then, as if on cue, the door to the dining room opened, and everything stopped. Ava looked up, her heart skipping a beat. The man who entered the room wasn't just any ordinary businessman. He was Gabriel Lawson. The energy in the room shifted the moment he stepped through the door. It wasn't just his presence that commanded attention. It was the confidence in the way he moved, the calm power he exuded with every step. He didn't rush, and didn't look for anyone to greet him. He already knew exactly where he was going. Ava's breath caught in her throat as his dark eyes swept the room, effortlessly finding hers in the crowd. There was something in the way he looked at her, something that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. As he made his way toward the table, there was a brief, almost imperceptible moment of hesitation, and then he reached Ava's side. He didn't speak at first, and he just nodded politely to the others at the table before turning his full attention to her. "Ava," he said, his voice low and steady, a stark contrast to the clamor of voices around them. Ava froze for a second, caught off guard. She hadn't expected him to acknowledge her, let alone speak her name in such a way. The room was still, almost silent, save for the subtle click of glasses being set down and the shifting of chairs. All eyes were now on Gabriel. He didn't wait for her response, whilst instead he reached over, casually pulling out the chair beside her. His movements were deliberate, slow, as if there were no rush, as though he belonged here just as much as everyone else in the room. He sat down next to her, his presence filling the space with an almost tangible weight. His hand brushed against hers briefly as he settled into his seat, and Ava felt a strange surge of warmth that she hadn't expected. She could feel the eyes of the room on them, but Gabriel didn't seem to notice, didn't seem to care. He didn't speak again for a moment. Instead, he surveyed the room, his gaze cool and calculated. Finally, his voice broke the silence. "Sorry I'm late," he said, his tone casual, as though it didn't matter at all. "You started without me." Ava could only nod. She hadn't expected him to be this at ease, this confident. She had only seen him in passing, heard his name in the media, but she hadn't expected this level of control, this quiet power. The other guests at the table shifted in their seats, some of them a little uncomfortable under Gabriel's gaze. But Ava, for the first time tonight, felt something stir inside her, something she hadn't felt in a long time. She felt seen, like she mattered in this room full of people who barely even knew her name. She didn't have to pretend. She didn't have to be someone else. For the first time, she felt like she belonged. But the older man at the head of the table cleared his throat. "Well, now that we're all here," he said, trying to regain control of the conversation, "let's get down to business." But the dynamic had shifted. No one seemed to be as focused on the projections and the future of the business as they had been before Gabriel arrived. Now all eyes were on him, and the conversation flowed around him with a new energy, a new respect. Ava shifted in her seat, trying to refocus, but she couldn't help the feeling creeping up on her. It was as if the night had turned on its head. She was no longer the woman who had walked into this dinner feeling small, feeling unseen. She was something else now, something different. "Ava," Gabriel said again, this time turning toward her fully. His voice was soft, but there was a warmth in it that made her feel like she was the only person in the room. "I wasn't sure you'd be here." Ava raised an eyebrow, surprised by the directness of his statement. She hadn't expected him to be this open, this forward. "I wasn't sure either," she admitted, glancing down at her hands. She wasn't used to being this vulnerable, especially not with someone like him, someone who had everything. But Nolan insisted. "I'm glad he did," Gabriel replied, his gaze never leaving hers. "I think you're going to find this world suits you." Ava felt her stomach tighten. There was something in his words, something about the way he said it, that made her feel like he was more than just another wealthy businessman. There was an understanding in his eyes, an understanding that cut through the walls she had built around herself. For a moment, the room fell away. The laughter, the chatter, the clinking of glasses, all of it faded into the background. It was just Gabriel and Ava, sitting in the calm, steady space they had created between them. Ava didn't know what it was about him, but she knew that this night, this dinner, was no longer just about business. There was something else at play here, something that felt like it could change everything. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. Ava tried her best to focus, to be present in the conversation, but her mind kept drifting back to Gabriel. His words had caught her off guard. His warmth and attention, a stark contrast to the cold, calculating atmosphere she had walked into just hours earlier. She glanced over at him, sitting beside her, engaged in conversation with the others, but always aware of her, always returning his attention to her, as if she mattered, as if she were part of something bigger than herself. It was strange, this feeling of being seen, truly seen. She wasn't used to it, not from her ex-husband, not from the people in her life who had dismissed her so easily, but Gabriel, in his quiet way, made her feel important, like she wasn't just filling a seat at the table. While as the evening wore on, the clinking of silverware and quiet chatter filled the air. Ava felt a bit out of place, her nerves still lingering from Bradley's condescending remarks. The room was full of people who seemed so at ease, so sure of themselves, while Ava was clinging to the edges, wondering how she had gotten here and why she felt so different. Gabriel's voice broke through her thoughts once again, his deep tone drawing her back into the moment. "Ava," he said, leaning toward her. "There's a project I'm involved with, and I think you'd be a perfect fit. Would you be interested in hearing about it?" She blinked, taken aback. She had been so lost in her own thoughts that she hadn't realized Gabriel had been talking to her. But the words, his invitation, hung in the air, something solid amidst the swirling chaos of her emotions. "A project?" she asked, trying to maintain her composure. But the sudden shift in her reality left her unsure of herself. What kind of project?" Gabriel's eyes were steady, focused on her with an intensity that made her heart beat a little faster. "A business venture. One where you can make a real impact. I've been following your work, your approach to problem solving. It's exactly what we need. I can offer you a position in my company, something meaningful." Ava's mind raced. Was he serious? She had spent so many years fighting to build a life for herself, but here was Gabriel Lawson, offering her a chance to step into a world of unimaginable power and influence. Could she do it? Could she really accept this offer, this opportunity to change everything? The words stuck in her throat, a mix of fear and hope colliding in her chest. I don't know," she finally said, the weight of his offer settling on her shoulders. I've never worked in a company like yours before. I don't even know where to start." Gabriel smiled gently, his hand reaching for hers on the table, and his touch was reassuring, steady. "That's the point, Ava," he said, his voice calm. "You don't need to know everything. What you bring is your perspective, your ability to see things differently. We're looking for someone who can think outside the box, someone who won't be afraid to make waves." Ava felt the tension in her chest begin to loosen. There was something in his words, something in the way he spoke to her, that made her believe he truly saw her potential. But not as a woman who had been married to a wealthy man, not as a woman who had been dismissed and forgotten, but as someone who had a vision, a voice that could make a difference. She glanced around the table, the investors, the high-powered executives, all absorbed in their own conversations. They had no idea who she was, what she had been through, what she was capable of. But here, with Gabriel, she felt like she could stand tall, like she belonged. "I don't know what to say," she murmured, but her voice quieter now, filled with uncertainty. "This is all so overwhelming. I'm just you," Gabriel interrupted, his voice firm but gentle. "That's all I'm asking for. Just you." For a moment, they sat in silence, the weight of the conversation sinking in. Ava's heart was racing. This wasn't just a job offer. It was a chance to completely rewrite her story, to step into a world she had always thought was beyond her reach. But was she ready for it? What was she ready to leave behind the life she had known? The life she had fought so hard to build? The question lingered in the air. But before she could answer, the door to the restaurant opened again, and a new figure entered. This one was different. His presence wasn't as commanding as Gabriel's, but there was something about him that drew attention. He had the same quiet authority, the same sense of power, but in a more subdued, subtle way. Ava watched as Gabriel stiffened slightly, and his eyes narrowing ever so slightly as the man walked toward their table. "Gabriel," the man said, his voice cool and professional. "I hope I'm not interrupting." Gabriel's smile was polite, but there was an edge to it. "Not at all, Marcus," he said, standing up to shake the man's hand. "We're just finishing up here." Ava felt the tension in the room shift again. Who was this? Why did Gabriel seem so different around him? It was as if the air had changed, becoming charged with something she couldn't quite put her finger on. Marcus, the newcomer, glanced briefly at Ava, his eyes scanning her with an air of calculation. "I see you've made some new acquaintances," he said, with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'll leave you to it." With that, Marcus turned and walked away, leaving a strange silence behind him. Ava couldn't help but notice the shift in Gabriel's demeanor. The warmth he had shown her just moments ago had faded, while replaced by something more guarded, more distant. It was as if Marcus's presence had drained the room of its energy, and Ava found herself sitting there, unsure of what to think, unsure of what to do next. The dinner had shifted in ways Ava couldn't quite comprehend. Gabriel had become more distant, his previous warmth now guarded, his focus shifting back to business. Ava tried to push past the strange tension Marcus had brought into the room, but it was difficult to ignore. While the unspoken words hung between Gabriel and Marcus like a silent battle, one that Ava felt she was caught in the middle of. She shifted in her seat, trying to stay present, trying to maintain the professionalism she had worked so hard to cultivate. The evening moved on, and the investors at the table began discussing strategies, projections, and industry trends. But Ava couldn't focus. Her mind kept wandering back to the way Gabriel had reacted when Marcus entered the room, when she had seen that subtle shift before, when someone wanted to conceal something, when someone was trying to maintain control. It was like watching a calm lake suddenly ripple with an unseen force. Gabriel had always been calm, confident. the kind of man who commanded attention without saying much. But now, with Marcus present, he was different, distant, almost cold. Ava's hand trembled slightly as she took a sip of her water. She couldn't help but wonder if this was all too much for her, so too fast, too sudden. One moment she was a waitress with a dream, sitting at a table surrounded by strangers, and the next, she was surrounded by billionaires. Her ex-husband's sharp gaze never too far behind, and Gabriel Lawson offering her opportunities she hadn't dared imagine. "Ava," Gabriel's voice cut through her thoughts, his deep tone pulling her back to the present. He was looking at her, his expression unreadable. "We need to talk after this," he said, and his eyes not meeting hers directly, but rather glancing towards the other investors. Ava nodded slowly, unsure of what to expect. What was this conversation going to be about? Had something changed again? Was he losing interest in her too? Was she just a project to him, someone he could help for a while, and then move on from when she was no longer of use? The rest of the dinner passed in a blur, the polite conversations and polite smiles fading into the background of her mind. She wasn't sure if it was the pressure of the situation or the mounting confusion about Gabriel's behavior, but her thoughts seemed to be running in 1,000 different directions. After the meal ended, the guests slowly began to disperse, exchanging business cards, congratulating each other on the successful night, and stepping out into the chilly night air. Ava stood up, her legs slightly shaky from sitting still for so long. As the last few people filtered out of the room, she caught a glimpse of Bradley standing by the door, his face tight, his hands in his pockets. His eyes met hers, and for the briefest of moments, she saw something in them, something other than the usual dismissive contempt. Was it jealousy? Or perhaps regret? Ava quickly looked away. She didn't want to waste another second on him, on that life. It was over. She was done with it. "Ava." She turned at the sound of Gabriel's voice. He was standing by the door, waiting for her. Yet his expression was still that unreadable mask, but there was something softer about it now. Something that made her wonder if maybe she had been overthinking things. Maybe this wasn't all some grand game, some play for power. Maybe Gabriel Lawson was just human. She walked over to him, trying to shake off the feeling of uncertainty that had settled in her stomach. Gabriel looked at her as she approached, his gaze steady but not unkind. "We need to talk," he repeated, his tone more serious now. It's important." Ava swallowed, trying to steady herself. She wasn't sure what this conversation was going to be about, but she could feel the gravity of it. The stakes had shifted. This wasn't just a casual discussion anymore. She had already gone too far to back out now. "All right," she said, her voice steady, though her heart was racing. "Where?" Gabriel gestured toward the back of the restaurant, a private lounge area just beyond the main dining room. This way." As they walked through the quiet space, the sound of their footsteps echoed in the otherwise empty restaurant. The dim lighting of the lounge created a soft, intimate atmosphere, the perfect setting for the kind of conversation that was about to unfold. Ava sat down across from Gabriel, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She was waiting, her mind racing with questions, with fears. She wasn't sure what he wanted from her, but she knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just about business anymore. There was something more here, something deeper. And for better or for worse, she had walked straight into it. "I've been thinking a lot about you, Ava," Gabriel began, his voice calm but filled with an intensity that made her sit up straighter. "About your potential, your drive. And I think you could be a lot more than just a consultant. I'm offering you a position in my company, something that will put you at the top of the industry. I'm not offering this to just anyone, but I believe you're different. I think you could change the game." Ava blinked, her breath catching in her throat. Was he serious? She had worked hard her entire life, done everything she could to make a living. But this was beyond anything she had ever imagined. She had never thought a man like Gabriel Lawson would even look twice at her, let alone offer her a place in his world. I don't know what to say." Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke. "This is all so overwhelming. I've never been in this world before. I'm not sure I belong." Gabriel leaned forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "You belong because you see things differently, Ava. That's what makes you special. This world can be cold, calculating. But you're not afraid to see the human side of things. You're not afraid to step outside the lines, to push against the rules." Ava's heart skipped a beat. "But what about everything else? This isn't just a job offer. This is life-changing." Gabriel's lips curled into a slight smile, his eyes softening. "Exactly. That's the point. You can change everything, Ava. You don't have to play by their rules anymore." For a moment, the room felt like it was holding its breath. Ava stared at Gabriel, trying to process the weight of his words, not the gravity of the decision in front of her. Was she really ready for this? Could she really step into this new life, this new world? Gabriel's hand rested gently on the table between them, his fingers slightly outstretched, as if offering her a bridge. "This is your chance, Ava. A real chance. I'm not asking you to decide right now, but think about it." Ava sat back in her chair, her mind racing. The world around her felt both overwhelming and inviting. She had always been strong, always fought for what she wanted. But this was something different. And for the first time in a long time, Ava felt the tiniest spark of hope. Ava's mind raced as she walked back to her car after the dinner. Gabriel's words echoed in her ears, swirling in her thoughts like a storm that couldn't be quieted. The offer was everything she had ever dreamed of, a chance to truly change her life, to step into a world that she had once believed was beyond her reach. But something gnawed at her, at something she couldn't shake. It wasn't just the opportunity. It was the weight of what it meant to accept it, the responsibility that came with being part of Gabriel's world. She hadn't expected to be here, hadn't expected to be offered a seat at a table with the kind of power and influence she had only ever seen from the outside. But now that she was standing on the edge of this new life, the fear of stepping into it was overwhelming. But she had spent her entire adult life building up a career from nothing, fighting tooth and nail for every opportunity, only to be dismissed by her ex-husband and the people who thought she wasn't capable of anything more than what they had expected of her. "You have to make a choice, Ava." The voice in her head was her own, but it didn't feel like it. It felt like someone else's, someone who wasn't afraid to take risks, someone who wasn't held back by fear or self-doubt. That voice was quiet, but it was growing louder. The thing was, Ava wasn't sure she could trust it. After everything that had happened, after how Bradley had dismissed her, after how she had been overlooked time and time again, could she trust herself enough to take this leap? Her hand trembled slightly as she gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles whitening from the pressure. The night air was cool against her skin as she drove through the quiet streets of the city. But the drive home should have been a time to reflect, to process everything that had happened. But it felt like she was going through the motions. Her mind was elsewhere, on Gabriel, on the offer, on the life that was just within her grasp, but also just out of reach. As she pulled into the parking lot of her apartment complex, Ava tried to calm herself. She had a habit of overthinking things, of running through every possible scenario in her head until her mind was a tangled mess. But this was different. This was a game changer. This was her chance to prove herself, to take control of her future. But was she ready? The question haunted her as she entered her apartment, the familiar smell of coffee and old books greeting her as she walked through the door. The place was small, cozy in a way that made it feel like home. But it wasn't where she wanted to be anymore. Not if she was going to take the next step. Or not if she was going to leave behind the person who had been too scared to believe in herself. She set her purse down on the counter and walked to the window, staring out into the city skyline. The lights of the buildings below twinkled like stars, reminding her of the vastness of the world. She had always dreamed of more, dreamed of being someone who didn't just exist but thrived, someone who made a difference, who took chances. But could she do that? Could she really step into this new world? "Oh, Ava, you've always been the one to make it happen," she whispered to herself, the words a quiet affirmation. But even as she said them, a part of her didn't believe them. She had always been good at making things work. But this was different. This was the kind of opportunity that came once in a lifetime. This was her moment. But it was also terrifying. The sound of her phone vibrating on the counter broke through her thoughts. She glanced at the screen, on her breath catching when she saw the name. Gabriel. She hesitated for a moment, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She hadn't expected him to reach out so soon, hadn't expected him to be so persistent. But there it was. He wanted to talk. He wanted to discuss the offer further, to see if she was serious. Ava's heart skipped a beat as she answered the call. "Hello?" "Ava." Gabriel's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. "I wanted to check in. Have you thought about what we discussed tonight?" She felt a lump form in her throat. She had thought about it non-stop. But could she admit it to him, to anyone? Could she admit that the fear of failure, the fear of falling short, was still holding her back? "I've been thinking about it," she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "It's a big decision." "I know," Gabriel replied. "But I want you to know that I believe in you, Ava, and I wouldn't have offered you this opportunity if I didn't think you had the potential to succeed." His words hung in the air between them, the sincerity in his voice pulling at something inside her. She had never heard those words before, not from anyone who truly meant them. Her ex-husband had never believed in her. Her family had never believed in her. But Gabriel? Gabriel saw something in her, something that no one else had bothered to look for. "I'm not sure I'm ready," Ava said quietly. The words felt heavy as they left her mouth, but they were the truth. She wasn't sure she could take this leap. She wasn't sure she could leave behind the life she knew, the one that, while difficult, was at least familiar. There was a long pause on the other end of the line before Gabriel spoke again. "You don't have to be ready, Ava. You just have to take the first step. I'm here to help you along the way. But you have to trust yourself. You have to trust that you're capable of more than you think." Her chest tightened as his words sank in. Trust herself. It was something she had struggled with for so long, something that had been beaten out of her by years of failure and rejection. But Gabriel was right. She had to trust herself. This was her moment to prove that she was capable of something more. "I'll do it," she said, her voice a little shakier than she wanted, but the words felt right. "I'll take the step. I'll work with you." Gabriel's tone softened, almost like he was smiling. "Good. I knew you would." And just like that, Ava felt the weight lift from her shoulders. The decision had been made, and she had taken control of her own future. She didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was on the right path. The days following her decision felt like a blur. Ava had agreed to work with Gabriel Lawson, to step into a world that until recently had been nothing more than a distant dream. But now, it felt like she was in the thick of it. The opportunity was big, too big, and Ava wasn't sure whether she should feel elated or terrified. She had spent her entire life pushing through difficult moments, but this This was something else. She had heard the stories of Gabriel Lawson, how he had built his empire from the ground up, how he was revered and feared in equal measure. But those stories, plus the ones you read in business journals or hear from colleagues at work, didn't do him justice. No, Ava was starting to see a different side to him, a side that she hadn't expected. The first few meetings were intense. Gabriel was sharp, focused, and relentless in his pursuit of perfection. But underneath it all, Ava began to sense something else. It wasn't just the power he exuded or the business acumen that made him a force to be reckoned with. It was the way he saw people, the way he saw her, and no one had ever looked at her like that. No one had ever taken the time to truly see her for who she was. But there was something off about it, too. As Ava settled into her new role, handling various aspects of Gabriel's projects, she found herself constantly at the edge of something, always just out of reach of understanding. Gabriel was different with her. He trusted her, but there was a distance, a wall that kept him from revealing too much. Yet there were moments when he would look at her in a way that made her heart race, but just as quickly, he would retreat behind that mask of cool indifference. One evening, after a particularly long day of meetings, Gabriel invited Ava to join him for a drink at his private office, a sleek, minimalist space on the top floor of one of the tallest buildings in the city. The view from his office was breathtaking, the city lights glittering like stars. But the view wasn't what had caught Ava's attention. It was Gabriel himself. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his back to her, looking out over the skyline as though lost in thought. Ava stood at the door for a moment, watching him. She had never seen him this way. Vulnerable, almost. It made her wonder what lay beneath the surface, what Gabriel kept hidden from the world. "Ava," he said, without turning around, his voice low, almost quiet. "Come in. I thought you might like a drink." Ava stepped into the room, unsure of how to approach him. She had become accustomed to their professional exchanges, to the business side of things. But this felt different. It felt personal. "Thank you," she said softly as she walked toward the bar. Gabriel poured her a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid catching the light. He handed it to her, his fingers brushing against hers for a brief second, sending a jolt through her body, and she couldn't help but notice how sharp and crisp he looked tonight. His suit, the way his dark hair was styled, the quiet strength in his posture. He was a man who commanded attention without saying a word. But something about his quietness tonight, the way he seemed distant, unsettled her. They both stood there in silence for a moment, sipping their drinks, the weight of the city pressing in from all sides. Ava felt the tension between them, as the unspoken words hanging in the air like a thick fog. There was something Gabriel was holding back, something he wasn't saying, and she wanted to know what it was. She wanted to understand him, to know the real Gabriel Lawson. "You've been different lately," Ava said, her voice soft but firm, her eyes meeting his. "I can tell you're not just a businessman. There's more to you, Gabriel." For the first time since Ava had met him, Gabriel seemed to falter. His eyes shifted away from hers, and for a moment, the mask cracked, revealing something that Ava couldn't quite place. There was a vulnerability there, a rawness that she hadn't expected to see in someone like him. "What do you want to know, Ava?" he asked, his voice almost too quiet, like he wasn't sure if he should say more. Ava took a breath, steadying herself. She wasn't sure why she was asking this now, why she felt the need to probe deeper into his world. But the curiosity gnawed at her, pulling her closer to the truth. "Oh, I want to know what's behind all this." She gestured toward the office, the city, the life he had built. "What's behind the image? Who are you really, Gabriel?" There was a long pause as Gabriel set his drink down on the glass table and walked over to the window again, his back to her. Ava watched him, waiting for him to say something, anything. She wanted him to open up to her, to stop hiding behind the walls he had so carefully constructed. "You think you want to know," Gabriel said, when his voice low, "but you wouldn't like the answer." Ava felt a pang in her chest. It wasn't the first time someone had said something like that to her. She had spent years pushing people away, trying to hide the parts of herself that made her feel vulnerable. But with Gabriel, it felt different. She didn't want to hide. She wanted to know the truth. "Try me," she said softly, her voice almost a challenge. Gabriel turned around, but his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. For a moment, the world outside seemed to fade away, leaving just the two of them standing there, caught in the web of their unspoken words. He took a step closer to her, his gaze never leaving hers. "I've spent my entire life building this empire," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But the price of it has been everything else." Ava didn't understand what he meant at first, but then she saw it in his eyes, the weight of his words, the burden of the choices he had made. He had built this empire, but at what cost? Was it worth it? Before she could ask, Gabriel turned away again, his hand running through his hair in frustration. "I've had to make sacrifices," he said quietly. "The things that matter most. I've pushed them all aside." Ava didn't know what to say. She wasn't sure if he was talking about his business or something more personal, something deeper. But she felt the truth in his words. The walls that had kept Gabriel Lawson untouchable were beginning to crack, and for the first time, Ava felt like she was seeing the real man behind the powerful businessman. Ava sat in her apartment, staring at her phone. The bright screen seemed to mock her as it glowed in the dim light of the evening. The decision had been made. She had agreed to Gabriel's offer, stepping into a world she barely understood, a world that, just a few days ago, felt out of reach. Now it felt like everything was moving faster than she could process. The weight of the choice hung heavy in her chest, but there was also something else, something she hadn't anticipated. Doubt. It wasn't just the new job. It wasn't just the life she had agreed to step into, the life that Gabriel had promised. It was everything. The way things were changing, the way she felt like she was leaving herself behind. She wasn't sure who she was anymore. Her phone buzzed again, when pulling her from her thoughts. A message from Nolan. "I heard you're working with Gabriel now. Big things ahead, Ava. Don't let him down." The words were encouraging, but Ava couldn't shake the feeling of being in over her head. How had she gone from a woman struggling to keep her head above water to this, surrounded by people who expected so much from her? Gabriel, Nolan, the investors, they all seemed to believe in her. But did she believe in herself? Did she have what it took to make it in a world that had never really welcomed her? As she set the phone down, she caught her reflection in the darkened window. She didn't recognize the woman staring back at her. Was this the Ava Johnson who had fought so hard to prove herself? The woman who had spent years working 2 jobs just to make ends meet? Or was she becoming someone else? Someone who would lose sight of everything she had fought for? There was a knock at the door, and Ava's heart skipped a beat. Who could it be at this hour? She opened the door to find her neighbor, Maya, standing there with a concerned look on her face. "Hey, Ava," Maya said, her voice soft but full of concern. "I just wanted to check on you. You seemed a little off at dinner last night. Everything okay?" Ava smiled weakly. Maya had always been there for her, even when Ava didn't realize she needed someone. She was the kind of person who saw through the walls Ava put up. The kind of person who didn't let Ava pretend everything was fine when it wasn't. "I'm fine," Ava said, though she knew it wasn't true. Maya raised an eyebrow, unconvinced. You don't look fine, Maya replied, stepping inside when Ava didn't protest. You've been working nonstop, trying to make everything work, but you're not looking after yourself. This thing with Gabriel, it's a lot, right? Ava sank down onto the couch, running her hands through her hair in frustration. It's more than I expected, she admitted. I thought I'd be able to handle it, but now I'm not sure. It's not just about the job. It's everything else. The pressure, the expectations. I'm scared, Maya. What if I can't do this? What if I'm just pretending to be someone I'm not? Maya sat down beside her, placing a gentle hand on her arm. Ava, you've always been strong. You've been through so much already. You can do this. But you don't have to do it alone. Gabriel might believe in you, but you have to believe in yourself too. Ava looked down at her hands, her fingers trembling. I don't know if I'm ready for this. I don't know if I'm ready to step into this world and leave behind everything I've known. Maya leaned in closer, her voice soft but firm. You don't have to leave everything behind, but you do have to decide what you want, Ava. You can't keep holding on to the past while you're trying to move forward. You've worked so hard to get here. Don't let fear take that away from you. Ava swallowed, trying to push down the lump in her throat. She wasn't used to being this vulnerable, to admitting her doubts so openly. But Maya was right. The past had always held her back. Her past with Bradley, her struggles to prove herself, her fear of being seen as weak. But that wasn't who she was anymore. She wasn't that woman who had been left behind, dismissed by the people who were supposed to love her. She was Ava Johnson, and she had earned every step she had taken to get here. As she looked at Maya, she felt a sense of clarity that had been missing for so long. She wasn't going to let fear control her anymore. She was going to make this work, for herself, for Maya, for the person she had always known she could be. You're right, Ava said, her voice steady now. I've come this far. I can't back down now. Maya smiled, her eyes filled with pride. That's the Ava I know. Now go and show them who you really are. The next few days were a whirlwind. Ava threw herself into her work with renewed determination, focusing on the details of the projects Gabriel had entrusted her with. She spent long hours in meetings, reviewing contracts, and discussing strategies with his team. But no matter how hard she worked, her mind kept returning to the conversation with Maya, to the way Gabriel had looked at her that night. She was starting to understand Gabriel better. But he wasn't just the businessman everyone saw. He was someone who carried the weight of his decisions, someone who had sacrificed so much to get where he was. But as she delved deeper into the projects, she couldn't help but feel like something was missing. There were still so many unanswered questions about Gabriel's past, about why he kept people at arm's length. She wasn't the only one who had a story to tell. And one evening, when the office had emptied out, and the quiet hum of the city outside was the only sound left, Gabriel reached out to her again. Ava, can we talk? Ava sat in Gabriel's office, her hands trembling slightly as she waited for him. She had just wrapped up another intense meeting about one of the projects they were working on, but her mind was elsewhere. She couldn't stop thinking about what had happened over the past few weeks, the way things had shifted between her and Gabriel, the subtle, yet sometimes confusing moments that felt like they were pushing her to confront something bigger than just her career. It was the way Gabriel looked at her, the way he made her feel like she was capable of so much more than she ever thought possible. But with that had come a strange sense of isolation. The more she worked with him, the more she realized that there were parts of him, his past, his life, that remained locked away from her. He had built this empire, this world, but what was the cost? What was he hiding? Her thoughts were interrupted when the door to his office opened. Gabriel stepped inside, his usual confident stride now tempered by a certain heaviness in his step. His expression was unreadable, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, something that told Ava that he had made a decision. "Ava," Gabriel began, his voice calm but laced with tension, "I think it's time we talk." Ava's heart skipped a beat. She had been expecting this conversation. Mud had known that it was coming, but now that it was here, she wasn't sure if she was ready. Ready for what? The truth? Or the truth as Gabriel saw it? "I'm listening," Ava said, trying to sound steady. Her mind raced, preparing herself for whatever revelation Gabriel was about to drop. Gabriel walked over to his desk and sat down, his gaze never leaving hers. For a moment, they both just sat there in silence, the weight of the conversation hanging heavily between them. "I've kept a lot of things from you, Ava," he said finally, his voice quiet. "Not just about the business, but about me. I think it's time you understood why I am the way I am." Ava leaned forward slightly, her curiosity piqued, though a part of her was still wary. She had known there was something beneath the surface, something Gabriel hadn't been willing to share. But she hadn't realized it would be this difficult, this intense. Yet the idea that he was about to open up to her felt both like an opportunity and a danger. Could she really handle whatever he was about to say? "What do you mean?" Ava asked, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. Gabriel took a deep breath, as if preparing himself for the weight of the words he was about to speak. "I didn't start this empire on my own, Ava. I didn't build it from the ground up by sheer willpower and intellect alone. Well, there were others involved, people who were willing to help me, to teach me, but there was always a cost. Always." Ava's brow furrowed in confusion. What cost? Gabriel's eyes flickered with something. Regret, perhaps, or something deeper, more personal. He hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "The people I had to leave behind, the relationships I had to sacrifice. There were things I had to do, decisions I made, that I'm not proud of. But I had no choice. This world, the one I built, demands everything." Ava's heart ached as she listened to him. She had always admired Gabriel for his strength, for the way he commanded respect. But hearing him speak like this, so vulnerable, so torn, opened up a side of him she had never seen before. "Is that why you keep people at a distance?" Ava asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because of the things you've done to get here?" Gabriel looked at her, his gaze intense. "It's not just about what I've done, Ava. It's about the price I paid to get to where I am. I don't let people close because I don't want them to see what I've lost. And I don't want to lose anyone else." Ava felt the weight of his words settle in her chest, a mixture of sympathy and understanding washing over her. She had always believed that Gabriel was untouchable, that his success had come easily to him, that he had it all. But now, as he sat in front of her, she realized just how much he had sacrificed to get here, how much he had buried in order to build his empire. "So you keep everyone at arm's length because you're afraid of losing them?" Ava asked, her voice steady. "Afraid that if they knew the real you, they wouldn't stick around?" Gabriel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked away, staring out the window at the city below. "I didn't just build this empire for myself, Ava," he said quietly. "I did it because I thought it was the only way to survive. But I've realized something along the way. I've realized that it's not enough. The business, the power, the money, it's all hollow if there's no one to share it with." Ava felt her breath catch in her throat. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected Gabriel to be so raw, so open about his fears and regrets. She had always seen him as a man who had it all together, a man who had it all figured out. But now, as he spoke, she saw a different side of him, a side that was just as vulnerable, just as human as anyone else. "Why are you telling me this?" Ava asked, her voice soft. Why now? Gabriel turned to face her, his expression serious. Because I trust you, Ava, he said quietly. I trust you more than I've trusted anyone in a long time. And I need you to understand what's at stake here. What's at stake for me. Ava's heart raced as she absorbed his words. She had always been drawn to Gabriel's strength, his confidence, but now, when she was seeing a side of him that made her want to reach out, to offer him the kind of support he had so freely given her. I don't know what to say, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what you need from me. Gabriel stood up, walking over to the window and staring out at the city once more. I don't expect you to have all the answers, Ava, he said softly. But I need you to know that I'm not the man I once was. I've learned a lot along the way. But I can't keep doing this alone. I don't want to keep doing this alone. The weight of his confession hung in the air between them, and Ava felt a shift in herself. She had spent so much of her life trying to prove she could handle everything on her own, trying to show that she was capable of surviving without anyone's help. But here, with Gabriel, she saw that maybe, just maybe, it was okay to let someone else in. It was okay to trust, to rely on someone else. When for the first time in a long time, Ava felt like she wasn't alone anymore. The week after the conversation with Gabriel had felt like an emotional roller coaster for Ava. She was living in the world of big decisions now, her life shaped by an offer she had never expected to receive. She had given herself over to this new reality, and with every passing day, she could feel herself changing, growing stronger, more confident, but also more uncertain about where it was all heading. When she had spent the first few days in a haze of meetings and paperwork, learning the ropes of Gabriel's world. Every conversation felt like a step forward. Every deal, another piece of the puzzle she was trying to solve. But as much as she was getting caught up in the whirlwind, there was something gnawing at her, something she couldn't shake. The fear of failure still haunted her, the fear that somehow she wasn't enough to be part of this world that Gabriel had so effortlessly built. As every time she faced a new challenge, that nagging doubt crept in. Was she really meant to be here? But every time Gabriel checked in on her, his voice steady and reassuring, that doubt seemed to fade just a little bit more. He had this way of making her feel capable, making her feel like she could accomplish anything. It was unnerving at times, how much faith he had in her. One afternoon, as Ava was wrapping up a meeting with some of the senior executives, she received a message from Gabriel. Meet me at my office at 5. I need to talk to you. The message was brief, but there was an underlying urgency in it that made her stomach tighten. Had something gone wrong? Was he unhappy with her progress? At 5 p.m. sharp, Ava stood in front of Gabriel's office, her heart pounding in her chest. She had come to learn that Gabriel's world was one of constant pressure, constant scrutiny, and she had yet to fully prove herself. But tonight, something was different. Tonight, she could feel it in her bones. This meeting wasn't about work. It was something more. She knocked softly on the door, and Gabriel's voice called out, "Come in!" The office felt different tonight. The usual cold, sleek design had been replaced by something warmer. Gabriel had dimmed the lights, and a soft jazz track played in the background. The change in atmosphere was subtle, but Ava noticed it immediately. It felt intimate. And she wasn't sure why, but it made her heart beat a little faster. "Ava," Gabriel greeted her, standing as she entered. There was a warmth to his expression that wasn't there before, a softness that made her feel a little less out of place. "Come in. Sit down." Ava hesitated for a moment before walking over to the chair across from his desk. She sat down, trying to steady her nerves. "What's this about?" she asked, her voice slightly unsteady, betraying the uncertainty she felt inside. Gabriel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked over to the bar in the corner of the room, pouring 2 glasses of whiskey. He handed one to Ava before sitting down across from her. "I need to tell you something," Gabriel began, his voice quiet but intense. "Something that's been on my mind for a while now." Ava's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure what he was about to say, but the look in his eyes made her nervous. "Go on," she said, taking a sip of the whiskey. It burned slightly as it went down, but she welcomed the warmth. Gabriel stared at her for a moment, almost as if he was measuring his words carefully. "You've proven yourself to me, Ava. You've done everything I've asked, and more. But it's not just your work I'm impressed with." Ava looked up at him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of what was coming next. "I've watched you, Ava," Gabriel continued, his voice low. "I've watched you grow, not just as a professional, but as a person. Yes, I've watched you handle the pressure, the doubts, the challenges that most people would never be able to bear." Ava felt a wave of emotion wash over her, but she kept her face neutral. She had heard words like this before, from colleagues and mentors, but hearing them from Gabriel made something inside her stir. His belief in her had always been unwavering, but tonight, it felt different. "I've seen something in you," Gabriel said, his gaze never leaving hers. "Oh, something I've never seen in anyone else. And it's not just your skills. It's your heart, Ava. It's your willingness to show up, to do the work, to keep going no matter what." The words hung in the air between them, and Ava felt a lump form in her throat. She had never expected this kind of acknowledgement, especially from someone like Gabriel, someone who had everything. And yet, here he was, telling her that he saw her, not just for her work, but for who she was as a person. You're not just a part of my company, Ava," Gabriel said, his voice growing more serious. "You're part of something bigger now, something that we're building together." Ava's heart raced. She wasn't sure what to say. What was he telling her? This wasn't just about business anymore. It was something more personal, something deeper, and for the first time, she felt the weight of it all. "I don't know what to say," Ava said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I've never been the person people rely on like that. I've never been the one anyone trusted so fully." Gabriel stood up and walked over to her, his presence filling the room. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder, his touch warm and steady. "You are that person now," he said softly. "And you've earned it. You've earned my trust, Ava. You've earned this." For the first time since she had stepped into Gabriel's world, Ava felt like she had truly found her place. She wasn't just the woman struggling to make ends meet, the woman fighting for respect and recognition. She was someone important, someone who had earned her spot at the table. And Gabriel believed in her. As Gabriel stood there, his hand still resting on her shoulder, Ava realized something. This wasn't just about the job, the money, or the power. This was about something more. A connection, a trust, a belief that she mattered. And in that moment, Ava knew she wasn't just going to be a bystander in her own life anymore. She was going to take control. She was going to show everyone, including herself, that she belonged here, in this world, just as much as anyone else. The city was alive with the hum of a late spring evening. The tall buildings stretched up into the sky, their lights twinkling like stars in the dark, casting long shadows on the streets below. Ava stood at the window of her apartment, her gaze drifting over the vast skyline. But it was hard to believe how much had changed in such a short amount of time. Just months ago, she had been a woman struggling to make ends meet, a woman who had been cast aside and dismissed by her ex-husband and the world around her. But now, here she was, standing in a space she had worked so hard to create, in a life that had once seemed impossible. Her reflection in the glass stared back at her, a woman who had fought for everything she had, who had chosen to walk a different path. Well, she had chosen to believe in herself. Ava took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill her lungs. She had always been a survivor, always had to fight for everything. But now things were different. She had taken the leap, accepted Gabriel's offer, and had made a name for herself in a world that had once seemed so far out of reach. The journey had been long, filled with doubts and setbacks, but it had been worth it. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of new challenges and opportunities, and Ava had fully immersed herself in the world of business, working alongside Gabriel and his team. She had proven herself, not just to them, but to herself. She had found a new sense of purpose, one that was no longer defined by the limitations others had placed on her. But now, as the reality of everything she had accomplished settled in, she knew there was more to do. There was still so much to learn, so much to achieve, and as much as she had grown, she understood that there would always be more challenges ahead. The road was never truly over. She glanced over at the desk in the corner of the room, where her phone sat charging. There was a message from Gabriel, as there often was these days. He had become a steady presence in her life, offering guidance and support whenever she needed it. It wasn't just business anymore. It was something deeper, something more personal. And as much as Ava had tried to keep things professional, she couldn't deny the connection that had formed between them. She picked up her phone and unlocked it, reading the message. "Meet me at the office tomorrow. I need you for something important." The words made her heart skip a beat. What was this about? She had come to expect the unexpected when it came to Gabriel, but there was something in his tone that told her this wasn't just another meeting. Ava couldn't shake the feeling that this was it, the next step in her journey. That she had worked so hard to get here, but there was still so much left to discover. And now, it seemed that Gabriel was offering her the chance to prove herself once again. But as she looked out the window, the city lights flickering like a distant memory, Ava felt a sense of peace settle over her. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid. She had come this far. She had fought for everything she had, and she had earned the right to be here. Tomorrow, she would meet Gabriel at the office, but tonight, she was going to take a moment to breathe, to reflect on everything she had accomplished. The phone buzzed again, pulling Ava from her thoughts. It was another message, this one from her lawyer. "We've secured the deal. Everything is moving forward. It's yours." Ava's heart soared as she read the words. The deal she had been working on for months, the one that could change everything for her, had finally come through. She had done it. But she had proven herself in a way that no one, not even Bradley, could deny. She smiled to herself as she sat back in her chair. She had worked hard for this. She had fought for it. And now, as she looked out over the city she had come to love, she knew that this was just the beginning. Her phone buzzed once more. It was a message from Maya. "I'm so proud of you, Ava. You've come so far. I always knew you had it in you." Ava typed back quickly. "Thank you, Maya. And I couldn't have done it without you." She put the phone down and stood up, walking to the window once more. The city outside seemed endless, full of possibilities and opportunities. She had come from a small town, from a life that had been defined by limitations and expectations. But now, she was part of something bigger. She had stepped into a world that had once seemed out of reach, and she had made it her own. Ava took a deep breath, looking out at the horizon. There was no going back now, and she had made her mark on this world, and she was going to keep pushing forward, keep building, keep believing in herself. She wasn't just the woman who had been abandoned, the woman who had been overlooked. She was Ava Johnson, a woman who had earned her place at the table. And as she looked out into the night, the city lights twinkling in the distance, she knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning of her story. If this story touched you in any way, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment with a simple 0 or 1 to show how you feel about Ava's journey. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button to stay tuned for more inspiring stories that remind us of our worth and strength. Stay with us, because there's always more to discover in every new chapter. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.